Welcome grade 12s, it's Learn Extra Exam Revision. Today we're going to be looking at business roles and everything to do with business roles, obviously, so it can help prepare you for the exam ahead. So let's have a look at the checklist of business roles. First off, very important, is that you know the principles of ethics and professionalism in the workplace. So it's both, so it will be principles based on both professionalism and ethics, but it's also everything to do with it. And within this topic, you need to know things about code of conduct, behaviors that will be deemed ethical, unethical, and all those things. The next part of business roles that's very important would be looking at strategies to promote creative thinking. Now, creative thinking you've been doing since grade 10, so you have a good idea. These would include issues like Scamper, Delphi, all the different techniques, as well as different theories behind creative thinking, and also why creative thinking is important for businesses, entrepreneurs moving forward. The third point of business roles would be looking at explaining and discussing the importance of social responsibility and corporate citizenship. Now, corporate social responsibility and corporate social investment, remember, two different things, but we'll be looking at that in a bit more depth. And corporate citizenship in itself, a different topic, but know the difference and know how it applies to different types of companies and employees. The fourth point, as I've sort of preempted that as well in that, would be looking at corporate social responsibility and corporate social investment. And remember, you do need to know the acronyms. It'll make your life a lot easier. And these questions are often asked, and it's good to know the difference. Another point we need to focus on would be human rights, inclusivity, as well as environmental issues. When you go through previous papers, before the CAPS changed it, there's an essay that pops up quite often. But remember, you need to apply it to the CAPS. So when going through previous papers, make sure that you're applying it to CAPS and not simply just to the old exam papers. And lastly, we'll be looking at team performance, assessment, conflict management, and problem solving. And each of these, again, we've built up from grade 10 to grade 12, and you need to be able to differentiate it, look at different types of conflict management, and how companies apply it. Now that you've got a good idea what business roles involve, let's have a look at the short questions. And remember, within your essay or within your exam, there'll always be 3 sections. And the first section, section A, will consist of multiple choice, match the columns, and choose the correct word in brackets. I've chosen a few section A questions, and just so you can get a bit of practice and see what it's like, and also to see if you're still on track with your studies. So question 1, and remember this will be part of section A. And this will be multiple choice. And remember, with multiple choice, use different techniques. So I prefer to go through all of them, pick the one I like, but then also see which ones could fit, and then literally cross them out, because it'll take away your feeling of not being confident in what you're doing. So double check and check, and these are 2 free marks essentially if you're logical about it. So the first question 1.1. So an example of unprofessional and unethical behavior would be A, employing unskilled workers, or it could be B, increasing prices due to competition, C, waste and abusing work time by doing personal things, or D, attending to employees' work-related problems. Now, first off, remember we're looking at unprofessional and unethical behavior. And the first thing that jumps to mind for me would be C, waste and abusing work time by doing personal things. So this question is not only asking you what's unprofessional or unethical, it's asking you a combination of both. And C stands out for me because it would be wasting and abusing work time, which will be both a personal and an ethical issue. And just for example, what I mentioned earlier about how to take away things that could be right. So employing unskilled workers would off the bat be wrong. Why? Because remember, part of the skills development would be employing people and training them. So you can take that away immediately. B, increasing prices due to competition. That is neither unprofessional nor unethical. Why? Because prices fluctuate and businesses have the right to go up or down in their prices and to stay on target with market. So that's, again, immediately out. And lastly, let's have a look at D, attending to employees' work-related problems in the plant. So looking after your employees on a personal level, that could definitely not be unprofessional and unethical. It's showing your employees that you care, and you also know that's incorrect. So essentially you can see that C would be the only or the correct answer. And do this with all your questions, grade 12s, as you go along. I'm just going to go through the rest of them quite in a simplified way, but take the time and do it properly during your exam. Read and reread. Now, question 1.2. Which one is not the clause or recommendation of the King's Code of Best Practice? So before you even look at it, you need to, in your mind, recall what is the King's Code of Best Practice, have that in mind, and then read through the statements. So let's have a look. It could be improvement of corporate governance. It could be an external audit. It could be an audit committee or risk management. So reading through it again, looking which is not the clause or recommendation of the King's Code, it would be B, an external audit. And again, go through it, see why the other ones couldn't possibly fit or work, and then take those options out for yourself. The next multiple choice question we're looking at, when a business builds ramps for wheelchairs, it demonstrates that the business is committed to human rights, inclusivity, empowerment, or the environment. Off the bat, again, you should have a good idea of what is meant with what is each different thing. So what does human rights mean? What does inclusivity mean, etc.? And in this case, it would be B, inclusivity. Now, it will be inclusivity. Why? Because remember, part of inclusivity in business would be creating access or free access for everybody in a business to work in a business and not discriminating against anyone on any basis. So it would definitely include the aspect of inclusivity. Now, the fact that they're building, and let's quickly go through this. Remember, so what is it demonstrating or showing that it's committed to? Yes, it does look at human rights, okay, but by building the ramp and doing all of that, it's not necessarily working towards the business goals of having everybody work there. Then empowerment, yes, it could possibly empower people, but again, it is not part. Building a ramp will not necessarily create that opportunity for inclusivity, for example, in a business. And lastly, in the environment, that's an easy one to take off the list. Why? Because building a ramp won't necessarily affect that. So those were the 3 multiple choice questions I'll look at. And when you're doing your finals, for example, you will have 10 of these, and take your time with each of them and read through them properly. I took another part of section A out for you, which would be the words in brackets, and let's have a look at those as well and how you can approach them. So the first question there, and I'm going to read both options and we'll listen to which one sounds better. So corporate social responsibility or corporate citizenships means that a company's business model should be socially responsible and environmentally sustainable. So the key words here when you're reading through it is look at, so the company's business model should be socially responsible and environmentally sustainable. Now, when one looks at the statement, so corporate social responsibility or corporate citizenship, remember corporate citizenship is all about how to function as an employee in the business. And corporate social responsibility would be social responsibility and environmental sustainability. Do you see how easy it becomes when you sort of just quickly like rationalize it for yourself and see where it fits in? So the correct answer here would be corporate social responsibility. Good stuff. Let's go to the next one. This one looks at a force field analysis, or a SWOT analysis, is a decision-making technique which examines all the forces for and against a particular decision. Now, again, quickly think through what is a SWOT analysis, what is a force field analysis. Now, we know a SWOT analysis is used to figure out what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Where a force field analysis, off the bat, we know it's forces for and forces against. So when we reread the sentence, we know that it's looking at forces for and forces against. So the correct answer here would be a force field analysis is a decision-making technique which examines forces for and against a particular decision. Quick tip, when you're doing creative thinking, remember certain techniques are used to create new products, for example, but certain techniques are there for purely problem solving. And when they ask you this question, you can't just write down any problem solving technique because it may be specific towards problem solving or creating products, for example, or improving products. Keep that in mind. And I have one more question on looking or picking the words in between brackets. So the first part here, Porter's 5 or the King's Code was introduced to promote good corporate governance because of the prevalence of corruption and unethical business practices. Off the bat, quickly think, what are the two? So Porter's 5, we're looking at, for example, barriers to entry related to competition. So that doesn't sound right. And then we look at the King's Code, and we know King's Code is all about, well, not all about, but a lot of it's about corporate governance. So again, nice, easy 2 marks for you. So the correct answer there would be, the King's Code was introduced to promote good governance because of the prevalence of corruption and unethical business practices. Do this with all your questions and you will have success, grade 12s. Take the time, read through it. Now, there's a third section or third part in section A, which is usually match the columns. And remember, go through the same part. Look at what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and make it fit, but take the time to do it properly. Don't rush through it. And on that note, let's have a quick break and we'll come back and look at some medium type questions. Welcome back, grade 12s. What we're going to be doing now is looking at section B, which is the medium type questions. And remember, these types of questions in this section could be short questions to an extent where it's worth 2 marks perhaps, but also a lot of case studies and applying information that you know to a case study. And remember, it's very important when you are using a case study, if they ask you to refer to it, refer to the case study. Don't lose marks unnecessarily. So for this section, I chose the first one looking at creative thinking, and let's have a quick look at what this question is. Question 3. So compare, keyword here, grade 12s, the Delphi technique to a force field analysis technique in a table form. Very specific. It also tells you, give examples of business problems that are best suited to each of the business techniques. So essentially they're asking us to do a few things here, and before you get into a question, always make sure that you know what they're asking you. So let's break this down quickly. So the first thing they want us to do is to compare. So we know they want us to compare. So that's comparing, remember, so we're looking at Delphi compared to force field. We know they want us to do this in a table form, and we know they want us to do a third thing, which is provide examples of business problems. So essentially they want 3 things from you when you're writing this, and make sure you provide them with those 3 things. What I've done here is I've got the table ready for you, and we can just have a look at what this is. So again, remember, they ask you to tabulate. In grade 12s, often when you see tabulate, you think, I'll just write it down and sort of the person marking will figure it out. It's very specific. If they ask for a table, provide a table. And what they're also asking you here is they're asking you to, remember, compare. So compare the two. So let's have a look at what we have here. So first off, in a table form, remember, table form. So we're looking at, so the Delphi technique is a method of gathering information from a panel of specialists. So think back to what you studied in grade 10, 11, up to grade 12 on the Delphi technique. And remember, what is this? It's about questionnaires. It's getting specific information from specialists on specific questions. So that's the first part. With a force field analysis, it's a method for listening, discussing, and assessing the various forces for and against a proposed change. So 2 very different things here. Remember, we're comparing. So Delphi, we're looking at gathering information from a panel of specialists. The force field analysis, we're looking at a proposed change, and we're looking for forces for and forces against and how that works out. The next part here, under the Delphi technique, it's a panel of specialists in a particular subject area. So with the Delphi technique, if let's say it's a pharmaceutical company, they're going to ask people specifically in the pharmaceutical industry to fill in these questionnaires. It's not necessarily like if you go to the shops and you have somebody random go up to you and say, please fill this in. It's specialists filling in specialized or specific questions related to the industry. On the other hand, with a force field analysis, it describes the current situation and desired situation. So it looks at what you would like which would be the desired situation, and then it looks at the actual situation or the current situation where it is. So again, do you see the differences here? Next, with Delphi technique, you draw up a questionnaire on a topic and that's distributed to the panel to respond to. Remember the Delphi technique, this process could go on a few times, maybe even up to 3 times, where they break the questions down even further to get very specific answers. On the other side with the force field analysis, you list all the forces driving and restraining for change. Remember, the driving would be pros and the restraining would be the cons. The words are interchangeable, and just remember they could use either, and you can also obviously use either. And let's do one more looking at the Delphi technique. So after they've given the questionnaires to the specialists, they get this information back, then they summarize the responses and draw up a second questionnaire from the responses. So they take that information and boil it down essentially to even more specific questions. With the force field analysis, after they've listed all the pros and all the cons, they then allocate a numbering system. So allocate a score to each using numerical scale of 1 to 5, and usually it would be 1 is the least important, up to 5 being the most important. And remember the force field analysis, at the end you're going to add up your pros and cons to see which one weighs the most. And while we go, we can just finish at grade 12s. You distribute the second questionnaire with the findings. Lastly, with the force field analysis, list the forces according to strength, the driving forces on the left, and the restraining forces on the right. Then analyze both forces and identify priorities and produce an action plan. So it's not just good enough that you've just decided what the problem is or what change needs to make, you actually need to implement it. So we've looked at, remember we were comparing the Delphi technique to the force field analysis. And you'll see at the bottom here, this is worth, let's quickly go up again, this 8 times 2 will give you 16. So the table comparing the two creative thinking techniques comes up to 6 plus 6, which will give you 12 marks. It's a lot of marks. But this also now, remember, leaves us with a difference of 4 marks. Where are those 4 marks? Remember, this was actually a 2-part question. Well, 3 instructions, but a 2-part question. The first part we've done, we've created the table. And then the second part, it says, give examples, so provide examples of business problems that are best suited to each of the techniques. So this is the second part, and that will make up the 16 marks in the end. Let's have a quick look at these examples. So for the business problems, when using the Delphi technique, the example could be, it's very suitable for complex problems that rely on expert knowledge, for example, architecture. So it's for specific problems using people in specific industries for specific problems. So just think Delphi, very, very specific. With a force field analysis, on the other hand, this would be suited for decision-making processes on a vast number of investment topics where all the pros and the cons can be listed and assessed. So with a force field analysis, best suited to that. And you can also imagine as an architect, using a force field analysis wouldn't necessarily be the best idea to get different ideas using that. So again, as I mentioned earlier, different techniques are suited to different situations. Okay, and you'll also see here, this would be 2 times 2, so 2 marks for providing the example for the Delphi, and 2 marks for providing the example on the force field analysis, which will give us a total of 16 marks. Very easy if you do it calmly, systematically. Okay, very good. Let's go to the next question, grade 12s. The next question is question 4. Let's have a look at what they're asking. Discuss how the unauthorized use of funds and the price differences in rural areas could challenge ethical and professional behavior. Also recommend how these forms of unethical behavior can be addressed by business. A lot going on here. And again, break the question down and make sure you answer all of it. Also take in mind and have a look at the mark allocation. This question is out of 6. So as after we're done, I'll quickly refer back to it so you can see how they gave you those 6 marks. So let's start right at the beginning here and have a look. So the first part of this question is asking us, discuss how unauthorized use of funds and the price differences in rural areas could challenge ethical and professional behavior. So let's have a look. Pricing of goods in rural areas. Firstly, it's the lack of monitoring by regulatory bodies on the recommended prices. So often when you go to, remember this is a problem, we go to rural areas where things are completely overpriced because they have no competition, A, and B, nobody checks on it. So if they want to sell something at 3 times the price, people are forced into buying it because that's the only option they have. So there aren't enough regulatory bodies going in and checking that the pricing is correct. And this is obviously also an ethical question for the business owner, whether what they're doing is right or not to the community at large. Another part here, business owners having their business located in rural areas far from town add the transport costs to their price of goods and services. So what people would often do in rural areas where these prices are inflated, they'll say, well, it will cost you an extra 30 Rand if you had to catch transport into the closest town to go buy this. So I'm actually saving you 10 Rand by only charging you 20 Rand extra. And those kinds of things. And do you see how this now becomes sort of like an ethical, moral kind of issue regarding those people? Next, it's the lack of infrastructure results in businesses having no competition. So literally lack of roads, lighting, plumbing, electricity, all of those things needed for business. If it's in a rural area, they might not necessarily have the facilities available, so no competition can exist, or it's very difficult to exist. And lastly, you'll see there's the point, any other relevant answer. Another thing to keep in mind though, if businesses are located far from towns, people are forced to go there, but that business owner A, on the other hand, they still need to make a profit. And if people in the area do not generate a lot of money in themselves, it's also going to be difficult for them to generate money. So it becomes a bit of a catch between business, the community, and ethics. Remember, very important. So that's the first part that we answered here, grade 12s. The second part, they asked us to provide recommendations on how this can be addressed. So the recommendations could be the following. Firstly, that there is monitoring by regulatory bodies on prices, so that if a loaf of bread that should cost 10 Rand actually costs around 10 Rand and doesn't get inflated to 20 Rand, for example. Next, cost-effective ways of transporting the goods can be investigated. So literally remember also as the shop owner, when you buy stock needs to be transported quite far to you, and that adds to your pricing. Why? Because it's the price of fuel, delivery, etc. So looking at cheaper ways of getting the stock to the shops to make it cheaper for the community in the long run. Next, suppliers should work together to take turns in delivering goods and services, sort of like a delivery lift club system. Next, government should improve infrastructure in rural areas. That would be obviously the easiest way. If there is infrastructure, people would have access to these basics and competition could thrive because there's a possibility of it thriving. And again, lastly, any related answer. So let's have a look at how we got to our 6. So the discussion on pricing in rural areas. So it's 2 facts by 2 marks. So that would give you 4. And then the recommendations, which we discussed here, would be any 1 for 2 marks. And that is how you got your 6 marks. So important, grade 12s. Often you only read the first sentence, you'll skip over it, and you'll forget to do that last part of the question and lose out on marks that really you should have got in the first place. So remember, read, very important. Now, what I would like to do is to look at one more question and just keep you on track with this, the thought of, like we said earlier, ethics. But remember also part of the section would be looking at teamwork, conflict management, and this is a nice question on looking at teams. So let's have a look at this question. Describe any 4 characteristics of a successful team. Now, before I even get into that, remember, you want a happy team. You want a team that works well together because you want them to function as a team. And in the big picture, if they're functioning well, if they're working well together, they're working hard. Working hard essentially would mean they're reaching your business goal. If you're reaching your business goal, you're making money. So a happy team equals a good business. Now, So the question was, list any or describe. Again, another keyword here, guys, describe. So it's not good enough that you just list it. You need to go into details. So let's have a look at 4. So the first characteristic, and remember, so before we get to there, how many do we need to do? We need to do 4. So remember to do 4. So characteristics. So each member possesses the necessary skills to perform his or her task within the team. So each team member has their duty, has their role allocated to them obviously beforehand, so that they know which goal they're working towards, as well as the bigger goal they're working towards. So each individual needs to do what they need to do for the whole team to work. The next part, the team has set out realistic goals and objectives. You want your team to be able to, often what companies and good leaders will do is set up a small task first, have the team succeed, have them have that feeling of success, and then give them a more difficult task. And that way, it will encourage them to work harder and be successful the next time because they know they can achieve as a team. The third one, members are motivated to do their tasks successful as a team. And again, this is when you buy into working as a team, you'll work as a team. And the last one we can have a look here, members work with a common desire to achieve a common goal. And again, that's why from off the bat, you need to let your team know what their goal is, or personal goal even, and then go further and say, this is the team goal, and this is why we're doing it. Remember, you'll buy into things when you understand what you're doing and working towards it. And just for fun, let's do one last one. Show respect for the knowledge and skills of other members. And this is very important. If you are working in a team and people are negative, it'll rub off on you. And if you do not respect others, again, that whole negative vibe will create an entire situation where people aren't working together. And remember, if people aren't working together, they're not doing their job, they're not making you money, business perspective. And let's have a quick break, grade 12s, and we'll carry on with some more questions when we get back. Welcome back, grade 12s. What we're going to be doing now is looking at case studies. Remember, as I said earlier, case studies are very important. Why? Because if they ask you specifically to refer to it. Often you forget and you sort of just go off on a tangent and do your own thing. So read the case study, highlight it, make sure you're understanding what they're saying, and then you relate it to the questions asked. So let's have a look at this first question. Question 6, read the case study and answer the questions that follow. So Woolworths Trust EduPlant is a model of public and a private partnership that addresses national priorities such as food security, poverty alleviation, and capacity building in our communities, comments Woolworths BEE Transformation Manager Zinzi. Now, the government has called on businesses for this kind of participation, and the Woolworths Trust has been delighted to join forces with Food and Trees for Africa and a number of other institutions. So it's Landcare, SABC Education and SABC Education to further the goals of EduPlant. Now, also it's been announced that the Woolworths Trust has extended its commitment to the EduPlant program for the next 5 years. So go through it, highlight the keywords, and that way you know because you've highlighted, when you look for a specific thing, your eye will catch it immediately. Or if not, at least you know where to look for something in between the highlighted bits. And also don't highlight everything, grade 12s. Okay, but now that you've got that part, let's have a look at the first question. The first question is, and this is not specifically related to the case study, but it does pop up quite often. What is the difference between CSI and CSR? And this is for 4 marks. So let's quickly have a look at the definition, and then I'll also give you an easier way to remember it the way I tell my grade 12s, and it's just a quick, easy way to remember it. So firstly, what does corporate social investment, or CSI, what does it compose of? So it refers to any project undertaken by an organization which is over and above the normal business activities of the company and not directly aimed at increasing profitability. So it's not about making money or directly improving your business and its profits. Next, it's programs that will benefit the community and or in the environment into which time, skills, expertise, and money are invested. So with the CSI, the most important part here is the investment. So with CSI, it's all about the actual money you put into improving the environment, the community, education, healthcare, all of those things. So it's the actual money given to do it. You're investing it. So remember that CSI, I'm investing the money. The second part, or the second one, so what's the difference with corporate social responsibility? Let's have a look. So it refers to a strategy used by business to take responsibility for their impact on society and the environment. So they're looking at, this is not investing, this is looking at the impact they have on the community, on the environment. Okay, often when you watch the news, there's a lot of stuff, for example, around mining, where businesses need to look at what impact they have on the community as well as the environment. Next, it's not a single action, but rather an approach to doing business that guides all decision making in the firm. And lastly, let's have a quick look. It is the way in which companies manage their business operations that it does not negatively affect stakeholders. So CSI is actually the investment, it's giving money. Responsibility is having plans and the actions you take to not harm, for example. So one has money, one doesn't necessarily have a direct cash, if that makes sense. Then the next question here, grade 12s, provide 3 benefits of CSI for businesses like Woolworths. So now you know, they're not asking you about CSR, it's specifically what are 3 benefits of CSI for companies like Woolworths. So when you have studied, obviously in your textbooks, in your notes, it's what are the benefits. Now you're just applying it to Woolworths. Remember, apply it to your case study. So firstly, what are the benefits of CSI? Firstly, it assists in solving socioeconomic issues like poverty. Remember, there are a number of socioeconomic issues. You can name a number of them. Next, businesses can receive tax advantages like reductions or rebates. So at the end of the financial year, when companies are involved with CSI, there are definite tax benefits for them. And this also encourages businesses to be part of CSI so that they can get that tax benefit. And it asks for 3, so let's do one more. It increases or improves the image of the business. Often when companies are involved with CSI, they don't do it in secret. They make it quite obvious that they're involved in CSI, so that customers and potential customers can see that they are a good business and that they are giving back to the community, and in that way they're creating good public image. So those 3, remember 3, so it'll be 3 times 2, which will give you 6 marks. Let's go to the next question. Keeping in mind the case study. So discuss 2 consumer rights that have an impact on business. There are several consumer rights, and what's important here, they're not asking you to list it, they're asking you to discuss it. So you have to give a bit more detail. So the first part here, let's have a look at the mark allocation. It's out of 4, so we obviously quickly think about how many you're going to write. 2 points, because it's usually 2 times 2. So the consumer rights, so it's positive changes in the community, and this would be how? Through food and poverty alleviation. Other issues could be like increasing education levels, access, infrastructure, any number of things that will directly improve people's lives, or even indirectly, but it's about improving lives. Next, it will be working with government to improve communities. So not just relying on government to improve infrastructure, for example, but companies going out and actively improving roads, lights, etc. And really any other relevant fact on looking at consumer rights. Good. Grade 12s, hope you're all still on track here. Remember, take deep breaths as you're going through your exam and just focus. It will be okay. Now, another question, and this is a completely separate question, grade 12, so that was the case study, and I didn't go into too much referring into the woolies, but just do yourself a favor and add that in because it is the case study. This question 7, we're looking at ethical issues again. So often ethical issues are only addressed after a problem has occurred. So a clear ethics strategy is needed to better enable organizations to realize their ethical goals. Each company will have their own ethical goal. So provide 6 focus areas businesses should implement to realize their ethical goals. So they are literally telling you they want 6 focus areas around ethics. So this is going to be 6 times 1, which will give you obviously your 6. Let's have a quick look at these 6. So the first one would be setting ethical or ethical standards. So literally, as a company, sitting down and saying, this is what we stand for, and these are our ethical standards, and making it transparent. Next, setting an ethics committee. So literally having a panel of people sitting together, discussing it, reforming it, looking at policies, creating policies, but making it a group effort so that it's more than one person's idea coming through. Next, it's not just good enough talking about it, it's taking action. So you've decided what your ethical standards are, you've put together a committee, now you actually need to take out or take the action. So that's the next third step. Next, it's maintaining ethical culture. So not only should this be for, let's say, normal employees, ethical standards should go from employees all the way to top management, and everybody should have the same standards and the same practice. Also, what you need to do would be measuring and monitoring that this is taking place. And lastly, building ethical awareness. This can be done through sending out emails, putting up flyers, and often what companies do would be having like a workshop, for example, on different issues like sexual harassment, and educating the employees on the negative impact it will have on them, and also how to replace negative behavior with positive behavior, which will benefit the business. So grade 12s, this is the exciting part. We're going to get to section C. Remember, section C would be the essays. There would be 4. You choose 2 out of the 4. Always read through all 4 of them and see which ones you can answer best. The one I chose today was one related to this, well, to business roles, very specifically. Let's have a look. We're going to do a bit of planning, and I'm going to take you through the essay so that you can have an idea. So that usually, and you will see this will come in a little square. So this is the statement that's been given. So let's have a look. James and John are project managers at a huge textile company. They have a team of designers working in the company and quality controllers. It sometimes feels to them as if everyone in the team wants to do their own thing, and because of the conflict in the team, they get nowhere. Deadlines have to be met, but it seems impossible because some people are just being difficult. So that is the statement they're making. They're giving you a backstory to the essay so that you've got a context to write from. Now let's get into the exciting part where it's the actual essay. So change colors so you can have a look. So you are a professional mediator, remember? It's a process of facilitating. Now discuss the causes as well as the types of conflict, and then evaluate the role played. So evaluate the role played by management, workplace forums, and trade unions in minimizing conflict in the workplace. So again, as I said earlier, often questions are layered questions, and especially in essays, you need to look at what do you need for your subheadings, how many points do you need to write, and exactly what are they asking you. So I'm going to show you a quick way to quickly do a bit of a mind map on this before you start your essay, so that at least you know where you're going while you're doing your essay. Remember, in general, you've got about half an hour to do an essay, so try and keep your planning to the minimum, in the sense that you just use keywords, because you don't want to waste too much time on planning and not actually getting through the whole essay. So just use keywords so that you've got direction. So let's start here. So we know we're looking at, so the essay would be looking at teams. So we know that's the issue. And the first question they ask us here is, what are the causes of conflict? So what are the causes of conflict? Next, the next part to this, the types of conflict. So what types of conflicts are there? So types of conflict. Actually, with this teams, it will be teams and conflict. So just to keep you focused. And then the third part to this, they ask you, so you need to evaluate the role played by management, workplace forums, and trade unions. So the third part to this would be the evaluation. And not just evaluation, it's going to look at evaluation of management, Second one was trade unions. And the third part, workplace forums. So when we look at this, we can see we have a clear structure of where we're going with the essay. We know there are 3 parts to this, and when looking at this, you can sort of decide, do your calculation on how much do you need to write underneath each of them. So it's causes of conflict, types of conflict, evaluation, including the different workplace forums, etc. So remember, your essays out of your body will be out of 28, so you're looking at plus minus 14 points to write in your body. There's 3 of them, so 14 divided by 3. I would play it safe, and I would probably write 4 points underneath each of my subheadings. You don't have to. You can plan it that it exactly works out to your 14. With the 16, at least you know you've covered it. Good, so you've got your planning. Let's have a quick look at the actual essay. So the first part there, remember your introduction. Before we actually get to the introduction, grade 12s, often you forget that each essay needs a heading. And in this case, quite simply, you could have, so let's have a look at the question. So you're a mediator, discuss causes as well as types of conflict. I would go as far as make it as simple as conflict management. Okay, I left out the last part there. You don't do that, you fill the whole thing in. Or simply just conflict, any heading, grade 12s, but have your heading, it's part of writing your essay. So you've got your heading, then it's your introduction. Remember your introduction, you need 2 points, 1 mark each, so your introduction is out of 2. So very briefly, in your introduction, you can use facts, definitions, anything around the topic. So in this case, conflict, and they've done a definition, refers to the difference or disagreement or natural clash between ideas, opinions, principles, or policies. And a second one, we're just going to do 2. It leads people's focus away from work, and it impacts negatively on the smooth running of the organization. As I said earlier in the lesson, happy workers are hard workers. You don't want your employees to be in conflict. So that's your introduction. Let's go to your body. Remember, we did the planning for your body earlier, which was over here. So we know what we're going to start off with our first subheading. So we know that we are going to start with causes of conflict. Now, this you need to know that it's very specific in most textbooks, what causes conflict. So you're going to name and explain. So the first cause of conflict would be lack of teamwork. So this would be, I would underline that, and this would be another subheading explaining it. So it occurs when one member believes that his or her opinion or knowledge is better than his or her team members. So it's basically when somebody thinks they are superior to somebody else, this will cause conflict. Nobody likes somebody who knows everything, if that makes sense. So that was the first one. The second cause of conflict would be unfair treatment. So again, underline it and explain it. So when there's favoritism from the management, when one member arrives late or just absent without reason, and they're not reprimanded, and others are reprimanded. So it's like everything else. If people are not treated the same, there will be conflict, because why can, let's say, Johnny play on his phone during class and not get into trouble, but if I play on my phone, I get into trouble. So it's about being fair, and if people are treated unfairly, they will be unhappy. And without going into too much detail, the rest of them, because I want to get through the whole essay, other causes of conflict would be discrimination or gender bias. Another cause of conflict would be social factors or personality clashes. And the truth is, sometimes people will just not work together, and they will not work together, they just, for some reason, they don't get along, and that will be a personality clash. And let's do one last one. Poor communication or miscommunication. So this will cause conflict if, for example, everybody was told that they need to be at work at 8 o'clock, and it was supposed to be 7 o'clock, and everybody gets into trouble, for example, because the timing was miscommunicated. So conflict will arise if there isn't clear communication. And this all comes back to management, grade 12s. It's their responsibility to communicate clearly. So this was the first part of our essay. Also scarce resources, but you can get that. Then remember, our second part in the diagram we drew there to do our planning would be types of conflict. So it'll be interpersonal conflict with an explanation, intra-group conflict with an explanation. Remember, you need to explain all of these different concepts, grade 12s. There could be, for example, conflict between managers and subordinates. And let's do one more, approach, so plus and plus. So two positives, example, getting a company car or salary increase. So these are types of conflict. Again, most of your textbooks and notes will have a lot on the types of conflict. What I want to quickly get into is looking at the evaluation of the handling and minimizing conflict. So this is our third one. And ways of handling or minimizing would be, firstly, put policies and procedures in place and communicate policies to all members. So people like knowing what's happening, so inform them what's happening. And let's do one more example here. So regular staff development sessions with employees to reduce conflict. So communicate, have employees communicate with each other so that everybody knows what's happening. Now, as we get to this, you can see, remember, what did we say right from or what did I suggest? Write 4 points underneath each of the subheadings, so in the end you'll have 16. When you get to the end of when you get to the end of your essay, remember you need your conclusion, and your conclusion would be 2 marks as well. But before we get to that part, I quickly want to squeeze in, remember, you have to look at ways of handling problems in workplace forums, handling problems with trade unions, and also remember, you need to focus on workplace forums. And as you do that, you can literally make that 1 point underneath the heading of evaluation. So in conclusion, with your essay, grade 12s, effective conflict management builds trust, increases productivity, and as well as reduces absenteeism. And lastly, management should regard conflict as a process to be well managed but not avoided. Conflict will arise, it's how you deal with it. Grade 12s, remember 3 sections, section A, B, C. Keep calm, read your questions, reread them, make sure what you're writing makes sense, and timing, very, very important. I hope this lesson on business roles helped. Thank you. Bye-bye.